Hello,
Hi,
I'm Alex,
and I'm Val.
and we're here to talk about Sopranos and wrap up season 2.
Wow.
Wow. Funhouse. What a funhouse.
What a fun house.
It was a great episode.
Has
Lots of things happening.
lots of dreams.
So many dreams.
Sometimes you don't even know they're dreams.
It's true. I counted 7 dreams.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay.
I counted 6. But I think I counted the one where we have a cutscene of Tony in between, but he's still asleep, so I think I counted that as just one dream.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Well, a lot. I feel like it's a pretty revolutionary episode of television. I feel like perhaps more than it actually pushes the plot of this series forward, it just completely changes TV by all the chances it takes and what it's putting into the medium. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I find it one of the most memorable episodes of the whole series. I always remember this one.
Me too. Whenever I see fish, it always makes me think of this one.
Whenever,
Not like in my life.
like whenever you see a fish in your
No,
life.
but like when I'm watching this show.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's so much, actually. There's so many instances of foreshadowing in this episode before we get to the actual murder of Pussy. I was actually writing a lot of them down.
What do you mean by foreshadowing?
Well, good point. But there's a lot of use of their symbols to imply that something is coming once we can kind of look
Totally.
back on this episode
Yeah.
with, hindsight.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is really interesting just that they use dreams. Like, the only reason why Tony knows to go to Pussy's house to see if he's a rat
Yeah.
is because of these dreams, right? So it
Yeah.
gives a lot of credit to dreams. And psychotherapy gives a lot of credit to dreams also, right? If
Yeah.
you think about like Freudian, I mean, obviously like Melfi is a current 20th century psychiatrist,
Yeah.
but she comes from that tradition of like
Right.
dream analysis and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
David Chase says this show is about psychology and also
Oh.
how he was just miserable about the fact that they were going to have to do this procedural and Tony was going to find out that Pussy was a rat and how are they going to do it and someone's going to show him or something, and he was just like, I just don't want to do any of that shit. And so they just completely get rid of it and it just happens. And again, we've seen this earlier on in the show where the subconscious actually brings out some of the most important plot developments of the entire, story. And there's a few even that happen in this episode. Not only does Tony find out that Pussy is a rat, we also find out that Meadow is going to Colombia, which for her character is maybe one of the biggest plot points for her, character arc so far.
Is that confirmed after the dream? Does she
In this episode?
Yeah.
No, it's confirmed later on when she goes to Colombia.
Spoiler.
Spoiler, Meadow goes to Colombia. They did
Yeah.
tell you. It was real. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't ruin the show by
think you
confirming
did.
the dream sequence. But there is definitely there's a lot of value that's given to the subconscious and there's a lot of value that's given to what happens in dreams in this show. And it's interesting that they use that as an opportunity to actually propel things forward. It's kind of the opposite of what we expect of very literal or real world things happening to make things occur. It's actually all existing within Toadie's subconscious.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the dreams?
Well, why don't I just go through? I mean, it was making me think about all these instances of things that are showing up, up until they kill Pussy, these things that they're kind of associating with it.
Yep.
So obviously there's a pretty profound connection to water and the ocean
Right.
in this episode. And that's actually where the episode ends.
Mm-hmm.
That's the very last scene. We have Through and Through, the Rolling Stones song comes back. We have this montage, of Tony and the family event and then all the people who
Are impacted
are
by,
impacted by
yeah.
their by
Not
his actions.
all the people, but
Yeah, but we have Dave Scatino, we have Hillel at the at the Shylock operation. We have the person going out selling calling cards to more vulnerable members of society. They even explicitly say this, that they're selling it to immigrants because it's something that they need, but then abusing them and basically they will be shutting this down on them. So profiting at the loss of others.
yeah.
And then we see Tony with a cigar, which, is him kind of in control in this moment as much as he can be.
We also saw, an adult film, like,
That's right.
theater, which
Yeah.
I don't know what that was about. We also saw a poker game.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Yeah. So again, I mean, connected to their operations and
and some trash.
them profiting. Yeah, trash, some garbage. It's
Yeah.
garbage boom times. But the very last scene, the very last shot is of the ocean,
Yes.
and I feel like for me, there's something impending. There's something coming. Like there's something more eternal. We talked about a lot in the first season about the greenery and the woods, and this like idea of the afterlife and these more kind of like important cosmic questions that are always there.
Yeah.
And now there's this very strong connection to water. And I think the last scene is really like, it still exists, and I feel like something's coming for Tony. Despite the fact that he's impacted all these other people and he's benefiting and it's positive for him and his family, I feel like there's something bigger than all of them that still exists.
Right.
And is waiting out there.
Well, on a really basic level, right? We're left at the end of this season with this arrest of Tony, like, or whatever, by the FBI, kind of pending.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he gets out on bail. We don't have any sense of what's going to happen with that. So we're left kind of on a cliffhanger of sorts with that.
Yeah.
And so maybe, like, that, something bigger is coming.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. What to say?
But I think also too, like, it is that kind of, it could be any one of these things that he's involved in that he could be in trouble for, right?
Totally.
So like, it could be the calling cards, it could be these plane tickets.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted, I don't know, like, the part where he gives Livia the ticket, and then when he's saying, like, to Melfi, that he, like, he knew, like, or that's where he messed it all up. No, it wasn't to Melfi.
No, I think it was. Yeah, I think so.
That, like, that's where he made this mistake,
no, actually,
right?
you're right.
No,
Maybe
it wasn't
anyway,
Melfi.
That's okay. He says it.
But, like, that's where he messed it up, right? He was just, like, he had to give her that ticket. He didn't have any...
Right.
Like, he was so angry. If he had just listened for a little bit longer to her saying...
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. He could just been able to put up with it. It's interesting, too, how he's, again, it's such a great example of Tony being completely unable to accept responsibility for his actions. So immediately that turns into, Jesus Christ, how hard is it to get on an airplane?
Yeah.
Where he's given her a stolen ticket and is responsible for her getting arrested. Then he gets arrested, so obviously he's implicated in this, like right after he says that. And then shortly after, he's saying to Melfi, you'd think she wasn't married to Johnny Soprano.
Yeah.
So he has so many ways to basically like pass the blame to Livia for something that she's completely just a victim of in this case.
Yeah. Well, we also have in that scene, it's the one time that Melfi, she tries to push Tony, right? She even says, like, at some point I became afraid of you. And so, like, she hasn't pushed him far enough. Yeah. But she says the thing about his dad, right? Like, she's like, well, what about him? He didn't protect you from your, whatever she called her, borderline mother, right?
Yeah.
That was interesting. And then she goes on to, like, pick up, like, she says, like, I pick up sorrow, right? I pick up grief. Let's stay with grief. And he can't, like, Tony is incapable of kind of staying with that. He always needs to find some way to, like, get... not, like, high's the wrong word, but, like, we often see him, like, when he's dealing with these moments of intense sorrow, which he is over the death of Pussy.
Yeah.
That he can't stay there. He has to kind of turn on this, like, childish, he's, like, laughing at her, being like, oh, boo-hoo, poor me. Like, he starts
playing
to, like...
with his feet, singing.
Yeah. So I think that's important too. Like, he struggles to exist within these moments.
Yeah.
Where it would be helpful to delve further into them.
Yeah.
But he just can't stay there.
Also regarding actually addressing Johnny and his role as a father, it was interesting because when he's being escorted out by the FBI and Meadow comes home, he says to her, I'll be back in a few hours, which is pretty much exactly what Johnny says in the episode Down Neck.
I forgot about
in
that.
the first season.
Yeah.
So there's, again, this kind of like cycle of he's doing all the same things that Johnny did as a father, and clearly there's an impact of that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, let me go through. There was so many things that I was just kind of keeping track of because, we were talking about water, and that's where the season ends up. But, there's so many things that are linking to fish and water. And we've talked a lot about bridges, which are obviously over water most of the time that they're using them.
Mm-hmm.
But, we start off the episode at this Indian restaurant. Immediately, there's this like focus on a plate of fish, like a giant fish that's coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And then they actually move from that to Pussy, who we see. So they're kind of linking them. And then shortly after that scene, we go to just a shot of a bridge over water, right? So, and I mean, it's just, also like just the foreshadowing again in different scenes, showing that something is probably going to happen to Pussy are a lot. While they're at Vesuvio's, I have here in my notes, it's a little hard to read, but I think all my enemies are smoked. He's talking about how Richie's gone and, like things are good. And then there's immediately a cut to Pussy laughing. So, there was like that scene earlier in the season where they're saying our true enemy is yet to reveal himself. And yet, and then there's an edit.
That was still in a dream.
Well, no, I know, but it already happened earlier in the season, very slyly, where Syl is saying our true enemy has yet to reveal himself near the beginning of this season. And then there's an edit to Pussy.
Right,
we see him
I forgot
next.
about that one, yeah.
So again, that's another example that I have here. That actually happens in the dream. In the first dream, we have Tony in front of, the first thing. Saltwater taffy. He's on the boardwalk, obviously.
Yeah, there's wind.
By the ocean. Yeah, there's wind. We have creaking dock sounds, which I'm going to talk about in a second.
Yeah.
We talk about, they talk about like his terminal diagnosis. So again,
he has
there's like
till September 5th.
September 5th.
Yeah.
But, there's this link of like this terminal disease to the things that are happening around. In the second dream, we have seagull sounds that start off, right?
Waves, wind, seagulls, dock sounds.
Yeah.
That's what I wrote down.
We have in the sixth dream is, where, of course, we have Pussy as the fish, and he's talking to the fish. So, again, that's really making it quite clear.
We also have, even go back before that, we have for me, I think it's the fourth dream.
Yep.
Where there's
in a car, right?
No, where he's in Melfi's office,
right?
And there's the dock creaking noises are happening, even though they're in her office.
The one where it's mixed up between like Melfi and Annalisa.
No, even after that, it's when they have sex. When Tony and Melfi have sex.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they talk about like Pussy. He's the one who was almost carried off by ducks.
Right. Yeah. I have in the seventh dream, it's about...
we should have lined up our dreams before doing this because I think we
nonetheless,
labeled
there's
them.
a lot of dreams.
But the one after that, I have seagulls, fish.
Yeah.
And it's when Pussy is the fish, right? So like he says, swimming works every muscle in your body.
Yeah.
$4 a pound. These guys beside me, they're asleep, which is a reference to sleeping with the fishes, right?
Yeah. And so in the last stream too, he's talking about, like I bought a boat, 50-footer, which is right before the Columbia plot point.
Yes.
And okay, so now
Free Falling is playing in the background.
Yeah. Where it gets interesting is what you just said, actually, this sleeping with the fishes, which is a reference to Godfather I, the Luca Brasi scene.
Right.
That, the fish is sent, which is also a reference in this show to In I Dream of Jeannie Cusimano, where Tony, pulls the gun out of the fish, right? When he's going,
Sure.
when we were talking in that one about like the three villains, villain 1, 2, 3, and he pulls the gun. Anyway, Chucky Signore, when he kills him.
Yes.
Anyway, where this gets really interesting is from watching Godfather II, and perhaps if I name somebody and something that happens to them, if you really don't want to have a Godfather II spoiler, you should just press fast forward one time. But the scene near the end with Fredo, and Fredo's about to be killed. There's a few things that I believe, quite confidently, there's a direct quotation, basically, of what's happening in that movie in this episode.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yes.
And when we were watching Godfather II...
I had an epiphany.
You did.
So in that scene, we have our character, and it's on basically like a dock on the water. And there's a lot of shots that I think this show, Sopranos, references quite a lot. These shots of somebody like contemplating things out by the water. These basically framing a shot where you have somebody and they're basically surrounded by water. Think of maybe like Vin Makazian in the first season when he meets with Tony and he's contemplating out by the water at the end of the driveway. If you're thinking, we talked about this in the first season where like they go and talk. Think about if you've seen the entire show near the very end, like Sopranos home movies, shots where like Tony is out by the dock. There's these shots that are very Sopranos where you see him basically in a shot where there's like a body of water and you see the character like on the very corner.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, what's going on. Now where it gets really interesting is in Godfather II, they have these creaking dock noises.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah. And so that is like the sound effect that really is coming into play in this episode. So the creaking dock noise is like you said, like that's even showing up in the therapy dreams.
Right.
And it's kind of like tying everything together. Again, these like seaside water-based images and sounds that they're using all over the place in this episode. Linking it to death. We've talked all the time about bridges and water linking things to death. We've had Vin Makazian jumping off a bridge. We've had threats of violence from bridge, going back even to the pilot. There's really a lot. But I feel like there is actually this direct link to Godfather now, which is really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I like how actually like Syl, when they're on the boat later to shoot Pussy, he's like, what's that sound? He goes outside. There's kind of like a boat clanging, creaking sound. That's when he goes upstairs.
Yeah.
It's like an excuse.
Yeah. So a link of important characters dying.
Yeah.
Between those two movies. And I think that it's in some ways like a bit of an homage.
It was you, Fredo.
That's a great line from that movie. I love that movie. And that line.
What? Okay, there's like so much to talk about here, but one thing that I wanted to talk about was the whole situation with Carmela and her coat.
Yeah.
And I mean, weird that we suddenly get Patsy Parisi back. Have we seen him all season? Have we seen him kind of at all before? Like, not really. And then we see him. Well, we see him in that scene with the suit bag that contains the fur coat. But then we see Philly Parisi in the first dream, right? And we think it's Patsy because we just saw Patsy, but it's really Philly. But I think there's something like we've talked about themes of like animals and like domestication and being free versus like being jailed or being controlled, and I think that coat is really symbolic. Like we've seen Carmela go through some pretty like drastic changes this season in particular, right? Like she, we see how she's more complicit than we might have thought or even she might have thought. We see how she's trying to kind of like stand on her own. She's planning this trip with Rosalie. Yeah. With Rosalie? Yeah. To Italy. But then we see her when Tony brings this coat and she's kind of ignoring him, right? Because he's been a dick.
Yeah.
And
as per usual. She
like jumps up when he shows her the coat. Yeah. And I think it is kind of a symbol of maybe her like domestic, I don't know, like something about like kind of being a domesticated animal, right? Like she's wearing this coat, they have sex, she's like totally enveloped in this coat. We see Tony later, like when he's at the FBI office being put in that cage in the FBI, like in that like temporary prisoner cage. So I think it just kind of shows her like, I don't know, her appreciating her domestication in some way, right? And then she has that conversation with Meadow, right? Being like, your father like has given his life for you guys. Right? And which kind of echoes what Tony was saying. Like it was an interesting thing for Carmela for this episode to kind of flip into because she hasn't really been on that page for a bit. Yeah. So there was for me something to do with the coat. And I forget where we see what we have with Carmela next season, to be honest.
Well, there's things coming up that like build on that. So I think that they're establishing something new because I think that's like one of the tragic flaws of her character. Yeah. Is that she can be bought off. Yeah. And we do start to see that, time
even Tony says like in his fever dream, he's like, you still like your coat? Like, it's this like, it's almost like, it's also like almost like the leather coat, right? It's like something that's like symbolic of something larger. Yeah. And who wants a big fur coat anyways?
I know. There's something that's just like, Yeah, I mean, so unnecessary in terms of like the violence against animals or something for something like
Well,
that.
it's also
excessive.
interesting because we know that Tony does love animals.
Right.
Right? So that's also interesting for him. I don't know. There's something there. I can't
Yeah.
quite. But again, like I said, like something about the like symbols that we've seen about animals
Yeah.
that represent like the ducks, for example, that represent this like domesticity, and being kind of trapped, being.
Right.
You know, like that's a way Tony's able to kind of contain her, where he wasn't able to contain the ducks. They weren't domestic enough.
Interesting point. Yeah, because I mean, it is like kind of showing like the, championship of like human beings over animals or something when you can
Make a
wear a coat
out
out of their skin. And we talked about even going back to the very first episode, the ducks. I mean, I think this show does kind of analyze, and they do kind of give you an answer much more so than they do later on. But, they talk about like, you're afraid of your family leaving. But we also talked about in the very beginning this aspect of Tony does not have control over nature.
Right.
And that there's like a power dynamic there.
But he'd like to.
But he would like to. Yeah, I feel like he wants to be in control of everything, and he can't. So that's maybe like an attempt to kind of like have
I don't know how
control
fish like fit into that.
Yeah.
Like because fish are animals.
Well, I think it's just like expanding. I mean, it's just like it's nature,
Yeah.
whether it's on land or in the ocean. I think that it's kind of representing
Or in the
a lot
air.
of the same things.
So, I wanted to also talk about Pussy and his kind of like I mean maybe we see him come back in dream sequences, but Pussy's dead.
Seems it.
He's pretty dead. That must have been very heavy for them to lug his body into the ocean. And yeah, there's some plot holes maybe, like we were talking about while we were watching, like wouldn't Angie, like wouldn't she be skeptical, right? Like the last time she saw Pussy, he was like being
Silvio and Tony like show up and take him out.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, I feel like he's probably so in and out of that house and doesn't explain what's happening. I mean, I'm sure that Angie, when he never comes home, would talk to Tony and Silvio and be like, what happened? And they would have some story, and it would have to be somewhat believed.
I also really like the way Pussy says papadums.
Papadums.
He's like, we both had the papadums. It's like you hear these Italian guys, they're saying all these Italian slang words, but you don't hear them say papadums very often. But yeah, I mean, that's a scene that's pretty powerful. Like even and Sopranos does this for you again and again. You as a viewer, you are kind of like soothed into thinking like, oh, maybe it'll all be fine.
Yeah.
Like maybe they won't kill him.
Right.
Maybe, because he says like, I didn't tell them anything important. Like,
yeah.
Only these little things, right? But
it's been a year and a half. I thought it was interesting too.
Yeah.
It comes out that he talked about the tickets, the bust out with the Scatino thing.
Yeah.
And also it was interesting that he says that he brought up rubistics, which is a big deal for Tony, and that really gets to him. But that links into that scene that we talked about in the previous episode where he meets with Chris, and Chris just outlines the entire operation to him, and that he's wearing a wire.
Right. We also have that scene in the ending montage. I forgot that. They go to the they have an empty shot of the office, the stock office.
Right.
I forgot that.
Right.
But anyways, yeah, so Pussy.
Which full circle, que sera sera, because the first scene of the whole season was the Chris replacement, basically like taking the stock exam.
Right. Yeah, that's true. But yeah, it's interesting, right? Like we really see Pussy's arc in this season.
Yeah.
We don't know him that well in season 1.
Yeah.
And so we see kind of how, his decisions and whatever impacted the mob, but also impacted his family.
Yeah.
I mean, eventually we'll see how that impacts his family.
Yeah. One thing that I thought was really effective, this episode's directed by John Patterson, who directs pretty much all of the season finales.
Right.
And I think he goes way back with David Chase. And so like David Chase had, felt like they had an understanding of each other and their styles. So, he was confident in giving him these finales. Also, David Chase was actually involved with writing this episode with Todd Kessler. But there's a few things, like the shakiness of the camera on the boat.
Yeah.
I thought that was, really interesting and tied into a couple other scenes in this episode and some others. Like there was also, when Tony was sick with food poisoning, the sideways disorienting camera angles, which really reminded me of the shots in Isabella, the penultimate episode from season 1, which that led to a lot of major events, like that disorienting, depressed time for Tony. And I thought it was interesting that this time where he's sick and now having these fever dreams, and then we lead to, these realizations and then these like major plot points and developments.
We also have we're kind of on a tangent, but just in terms of the camera angle stuff, we also have AJ using a video camera at Meadow's graduation party.
Right.
And we see it kind of like through his point of view. And that's when that montage kind of starts to jump in, right?
Yeah.
So it almost kind of like takes us into a different camera lens or something like that. But I just have one more thing about Pussy before we go on from that. I like how in his last scene with Skip, right after the dinner, he meets with Skip, and they're talking about like, he's like, I know guys who have gone on to be really successful. Like this one guy became the garbage and waste commissioner in a
small Florida town,
small city in Florida or whatever. And so for me, that's one of those hints. It's like, no, like there's nothing good for Pussy that's going to come of this, right? Like, it's still all the same. Like the best that he could hope for is the same old trash.
Right.
It's kind of that impossibility of escaping, right?
Yeah.
So like whether they kill him that episode, whether it was a while off, whether he, ends up going to jail for a bit and then he's in the witness protection, like it's not good.
No.
It's not good.
It's not. Well, the philosophy of the show is not that optimistic.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's all a big nothing. Everything is black.
I also wrote that down, waking up. Yeah. And, and then Carmela saying, that's your mother talking, which it literally is.
Yeah.
I mean, that big nothing really starts to come back. And also that idea of everything is black, actually, that really, made me think about the final episode. The big nothing, but literally to say everything is black. It's something to think about, and it can kind of like link this to the final scene at Holston's and that last episode. I thought it was interesting too, like the fact that he's getting food poisoned by the Indian food. Well, probably not Vesuvio's shellfish. But even that first scene, like just looking at them, how out of place they look. Yeah. In that environment, like we don't see these characters in places like that. And then Carmela getting upset with AJ saying there better be Coke left in that fridge, as like that will be the remedy. Yeah. That's like the antidote to this thing. And also, like Tony's kind of like racist tirades about Indian food, that even Melfi references. It's interesting that they really are this like kind of like very quintessential Americanized family. Yeah. And that like the Coke is the solution to this, thing that is poison. Yeah.
Well, and Dr. Cusimano, who comes over and has, like, nothing helpful to say. Yeah. He's like, anywho, I'll get it. And I'm like, oh, that's the kind of guy who would say anywho. Right. Yeah. But yeah, no, I think it's interesting with the Indian food. Like you were talking about his racistness, but it was interesting in terms of two other images, too. So when Artie comes over and they're talking about his food poisoning, he brings up like the way that they cremated Gandhi, right? So we have these two images of like bodies on fire, right? We have Tony kind of like self-immolating, right, in the first dream, right? And then we have this imagery of Gandhi being burned.
Indira Gandhi, right?
Yeah.
With clarified butter.
Yeah, with ghee. So I don't know what that kind of symbolizes, right? Like that was just the fact that it came up, like burning bodies came up twice in an episode stood out to me.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting. Tony in one of the dreams, the one where he's with Melfi for the second time, and he's wearing the wife beater kind of thing, like the tank top. Yes. In the
Yeah, that's what I meant by in tank. I was like,
in tank.
What do I mean by creaking in Melfi's office in tank?
Right.
But I meant tank top.
Right. So yeah, where he's in the waiting room, I thought it was interesting, like the way that they framed it. You could see the picture that's referenced very early on in the series too, the one that he calls like a core shock test, the one where he says, "Why is there that rotting tree?" So they actually reference the rotting tree, at least the way he sees it within his own subconscious. Like he has placed that in the waiting room, and I think that there is kind of like there is this. Something is rotting in his life at that point while he's trying to figure out the situation with Pussy.
Yeah. It's interesting, like the things in his subconscious that are true about that. So like, especially when Pussy is the fish, right? I think that's when we get kind of the most stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like he says, like, I've been working with the government. You passed me over for promotions. Like what else was I going to do, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know how Tony would have like intuitively known that.
Right.
Or his subconscious somehow knew it. It's really, it was interesting. And then he dumps all the fish all over the floor.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I thought the form of this episode is pretty fascinating too. Like when I recall this episode, for me, the focal point is them killing Pussy. And
right,
I feel
but
like
it happens
that's the
so
climax.
early in the episode.
It happens like halfway through the episode.
Yeah.
And there's so much that happens after, with the tickets, the graduation. There's a lot. And it's just like, again, it's fascinating that, first of all, in the final episode of a season, they spend so much of it dealing with dreams, things that don't necessarily, or that do have a lot to do with things, but seemingly wouldn't. So, with these kind of like brief sojourns into the subconscious, that's not typically what a show would do for the first time in their final episode of a season.
Yeah, we've had dreams before, but not like this.
They're definitely expanding on, and this is, are some of the most memorable in the whole series.
Yeah. We have a similar, when I forget which dream it is, but when Syl is going by, like it looks like Tony's walking on like a moving sidewalk, and like Syl's kind of like floating by him.
Yeah.
It reminded me of the other dream with Christopher.
Right.
His dream. So it's interesting how like, even though we all dream differently, like there is this like common kind of weirdness or imagery. That's
well, and I think also like we talked about this in that episode, but this aspect of these characters just kind of like being pulled along, like they're on a ride or something. And, I feel like that filming technique is really successful.
Yeah, and it's so eerie.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting too. So like the imagery of money at the very end. So talking about where he's talking
like
to Dave Scatino, and Eric says, it's a money pinch. So even though he got into Georgetown, he can't go. And we talked about in the episode this season that features Eric and Meadow, pretty prominently, how Eric is actually a very like talented kid with a lot going for him, and yet he does not end up in the same place as Meadow. A lot is taken away from him, and he's not privileged to be able to access the same things as a result of Tony's actions. But it's interesting how that's contrasted with people like handing envelopes of money to Meadow at the party. Yeah. There's a lot of shots of like people just kind of giving her money. Yeah. And then focusing on, the collateral damage, the impacts of Tony's actions in the series so far, with Dave Scatino and Hillel and the calling cards and all these things in that last scene, but to kind of have those things playing off of each other.
Yeah. The other thing I found with Davey that was interesting was this, like, that he's going out west.
Yeah.
30 minutes from Vegas to work on a ranch, like to basically be a cowboy.
Right.
And he says that to Tony, and then he asks, and like, Tony feels like he's in control of this situation, right? Like, like he's destroyed this guy, basically. He's gotten what he needed out of it. But when Davey asks Tony, like, oh, do you ride? Yeah. Tony's like kind of like put off his game a little bit. He's like, oh no, I don't. And we know that Tony really values like that kind of masculinity, right? Like that kind of like cowboy.
Oh, interesting.
Masculinity. I think like we'll see Tony in other times watching cowboy movies and stuff like that. I mean,
Right.
we know that things probably.
Maybe the seed was planted for his like masculine insecurity.
Yeah,
start
well, I
watching
don't
cowboy
know.
movies.
Like, I think there is something, like, he was put off by that in some way. Now, I don't think we're going to see, do we ever see Davey again? Is he going to be successful living 30 minutes from Vegas
Well,
as,
and Tony
as a
picks
gambler?
that up, right?
Yeah, he's like, oh,
Las
Vegas. Yeah.
Also, there was another thing there, too, where Davey specifically mentions, he's like, you should come out. It's an easy flight. And then the last thing he says to him is, like, I think it's drive safe. Which I thought was interesting because I feel like it was an aspect of him not listening to him. Like that he, I don't know, assumed that he was driving or something. Like he's just like not all there in terms of where other people are. Like he lacks empathy and he lacks
driving,
interest. Did he say he was driving there?
Yeah, he meant like Tony could fly. No, but he didn't say it, but we see him packing up his car and driving away. It's like all packed on top.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well then. Good thing we have you here to keep me on track.
Yes, I'm always such a source of exact
Sopranos
moments
knowledge.
and, people's names and stuff. That's my strong suit.
Yeah.
As everyone knows.
Nonetheless, I still think that Tony does lack empathy.
I mean,
and he
shows
not a
that
good
in other
listener.
ways. Yeah.
But great point. You're right. Davey is driving. We do see that.
Yeah.
And yet we'll leave this season with me just, going out on that note.
I also, just a few little things from this episode
Yeah.
that I thought were funny.
Yeah.
The reference to Paulie's Christmas letter that he sends out every year.
I know.
Right?
That's great.
I thought that was great because he's like, why would I dream that about him? Like, why would I kill him? He's my biggest earner or whatever. Like, he does do little things that annoy me, like sending out his Christmas letter. Thought that was really good.
I know.
Again, the way that Pussy says papadums. It's really good.
That is good.
And we see Barbara.
We do see Barbara.
For a second.
Very exciting. A rare sighting. A rare Barbara sighting.
And
who won't let Livia come live with her.
Yeah.
Poor Livia.
What's the music that... So we only have like a little bit of music in this episode. So that's one thing I was thinking of just as a final kind of thing. We have the Rolling Stones song twice. We have it at the beginning and at the end.
We have Frank Sinatra singing Baubles, Bangles, and Beads when Pussy's about to be shot.
That's what I was going to ask you, what that silly music was.
Yeah. Which I believe might be from the collaboration with like Antonio Carlos Jobim or something. Maybe, I think. But doing kind of...
and we have Free Fallin'.
Brazilian arrangements. Oh, right, yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know what, like, the meaning... Like, again, at least both of those two, the Free Falling and the Baubles, whatever you just said, the Frank Sinatra song, that was music that was taking place within the episode. The Rolling Stones song is non-diegetic, or what, diegetic, if I could speak properly. So I don't know the meaning of having the episode like opening and closing with that, and like having it go over a montage. It's not something we typically see in The Sopranos.
No, it is kind of like, an elevated feeling.
Yeah.
It's an elevated kind of technique than what we're used to with this show. I mean, I think there is there is heightened drama in this, final episode of the season, and I think that it's reflected.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, can't wait for season 3.
Alex is excited. He got a new...
got a new audio interface.
A new audio interface.
You stay tuned. Tune into the next episode because it's going to sound completely different. You'll be able to tell very marginal upgrades in our sound quality.
Right.
If you've been listening to this podcast and you were thinking, I love what they're saying, but the audio quality of their voices is just not quite there, then tune in for the rest of In at the End because it'll blow you away with its marginal increase in sound quality.
We're so dedicated to this podcast that, Alex won't be using it for anything else.
No, just this. That's why I got it. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, thanks for listening. And loves Funhouse. And we'll see you next time.
I don't think we ever said what episode we were talking about. We're talking about
Funhouse. Season 2, episode 13.
Yeah.
Next, season 3.
Bye.